The lawyer didn't ask me to sit down. He just looked at me across the polished walnut table and said, "You have been named the primary beneficiary in the will. The amount is $55 million. If stories about family drama, betrayal, inheritance, and delayed revenge speak to you, take a second to like, comment, and subscribe." What happened next didn't explode all at once. It unfolded slowly, and by the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late. My name is Hannah Whitaker. I was 32 years old, a licensed geriatric nurse in Phoenix, Arizona, working double shifts in long-term care and private home settings. I made $68,000 a year before taxes, lived in a rented one-bedroom apartment, and sent money home every month to a family that never once thanked me for it. The man who left me that money was named Samuel Prescott, and his family hated me long before they knew my name. 3 months earlier, if you had asked anyone who I was, they would have said something like, the quiet one, the reliable one, the daughter who never complains. In my family, that wasn't praise. It was a role. My mother, Evelyn Whitaker, liked to say I was born old, serious, dutiful, useful. My older brother, Michael Whitaker, liked to say I was invisible unless something needed to be done. Michael was 38, owned a regional HVAC company with my father's seed money, and had never missed a chance to remind me that nursing wasn't a real career. He called it wiping people down for tips. I never corrected him. I learned early that arguing only gave them something to push against. The day everything began, the trigger wasn't the will. It was Thanksgiving. We were sitting around my parents' dining table in Mesa, Arizona. Turkey drying out, football on too loud. Michael holding court at one end, telling a story about closing another commercial contract. And then the guy asks me if I'm worried about the slowdown, Michael said, laughing. I told him, some of us actually create value. His eyes flicked to me. My mother smiled politely. Hannah works very hard, she said. The way you talk about someone who carries groceries. I passed the gravy. No one asked about my schedule, even though I had come straight from a night shift and would be going back in 6 hours. No one asked why I looked tired. They never did. When dessert came out, my father, Richard Whitaker, cleared his throat. Michael's expanding, he said. We're thinking of bringing the family more formally into the business. I already knew what that meant. Hannah, my brother said, leaning back in his chair, you probably won't have the bandwidth for this kind of thing. Your job is demanding. He said it kindly. That was his trick. I'm fine, I said. Michael smiled. Of course you are. You're always fine. That night, my mother pulled me aside while I was washing dishes. You should consider cutting back at work, Evelyn said. You're not getting any younger. It would be nice if you were around more. I'm around when you need something, I replied. She frowned. There's no need to be defensive. I apologized. I always did. 2 days later, I received a call from the private care agency. They had a new client. High profile, long-term, required discretion, consistency, and medical experience with late-stage cardiac conditions and cognitive decline. The pay was almost double my current rate. The patient's name was Samuel Prescott. He lived alone in a large estate on the outskirts of Scottsdale. His wife had died years earlier. His children were grown, estranged, according to the intake notes. He'd fired his last 3 caregivers. When I arrived for the interview, Samuel Prescott was sitting in a sunlit room lined with books, wearing a pressed button-down shirt and watching me carefully. You're early, he said. I don't like being late, I replied. He nodded. Good. He asked about my credentials, my experience, my boundaries. Then he asked something no one else ever had. Why do you do this work? He said. I didn't answer right away. Because people still deserve dignity when they're no longer convenient, I said finally. He studied me for a long moment. You'll do, he said. Working for Samuel Prescott was not easy. He was sharp, stubborn, and deeply private. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want to be handled. He wanted competence. And he noticed everything. He noticed that I spoke to him directly, not over him. That I explained procedures even when he didn't ask. That I never touched his things without permission. He noticed when I came in on my days off because another nurse canceled. He noticed when I stayed late because he was anxious at night. What he didn't notice, or pretended not to, was how little I talked about myself. I didn't mention my family, I didn't mention my brother. I didn't mention how often I was told that I should be grateful just to have a job. Samuel talked, though, not at first, but slowly, about his wife, Margaret Prescott, about his company, which he'd sold decades earlier, about his children, Daniel Prescott and Laura Prescott, who visited once or twice a year and treated the house like a hotel. "They assume the money will handle everything," he said once. "It always has." I didn't comment. It wasn't my place. Until one evening, as I was adjusting his medication tray, he said, almost casually, "You know, Hannah, my children think loyalty is inherited." I looked up. He met my eyes. "I've learned it's earned." I didn't understand then what that sentence would cost everyone else. 3 weeks later, Samuel Prescott collapsed in the early morning hours. I was the one who found him. I was the one who stabilized him until the paramedics arrived. I was the one who sat beside his hospital bed when his children arrived hours later, annoyed, irritated, already arguing quietly about logistics. Laura Prescott looked at me like I was furniture. Daniel Prescott didn't look at me at all. When Samuel was discharged back home, his attorney came by. His longtime lawyer, Martin Hale, a man with calm eyes and a voice that carried weight. I wasn't invited into that meeting. I wasn't supposed to be. But as Martin Hale was leaving, he paused, looked at me, and said, "Thank you for taking care of him." It was the first time anyone connected to Samuel's world had acknowledged my existence. 2 months later, Samuel Prescott died in his sleep. I was not in the room. I had done my job. At the reading of the will, I sat at the far end of the table, wearing my work clothes, expecting nothing. I had already said goodbye. I had already gone back to my life. Then Martin Hale looked at me and spoke my name. That was when the room changed. That was when the Prescott family turned and saw me clearly for the first time. And that was when my own family, who had come out of curiosity, finally understood something they had never considered possible. I was no longer the quiet one. And this time, I wasn't apologizing. No one spoke right away. The silence after Martin Hale read the figure was thick, almost physical, like the room had lost oxygen. $55 million sat between us on the table, not as cash, but as an accusation. Daniel Prescott was the first to recover. "That's not possible," he said, leaning forward, palms flat against the table. His suit jacket creaked slightly, strained across his shoulders. "There has to be a mistake." Laura Prescott turned to the lawyer, her lips already tight with calculation. "My father wasn't in his right mind at the end," she said. "He was medicated, vulnerable." Martin Hale didn't react. He had heard this before, just not from them. "Mr. Prescott's will was revised 8 months ago," he said calmly. "It was witnessed, notarized, and accompanied by a full medical evaluation, affirming capacity." Daniel's eyes finally landed on me. "You," he said. Not my name. Just that single word, sharp with disbelief. "You're the nurse." I nodded once. "The nurse who worked for him?" Laura added, her gaze slicing over me. "The one who was always here." "Yes," I said. Michael Whitaker shifted beside me. My brother had come with our parents out of pure curiosity, assuming this was another performance of wealth he could mock on the drive home. I could feel him stiffen. My mother, Evelyn Whitaker, whispered my name like it was a warning. "Hannah." I didn't look at her. Daniel Prescott stood up. "This is manipulation," he said, voice rising. "My father was isolated. You had access. You influenced him." I met his eyes. I changed his dressings and administered medication. I didn't write his will. Laura laughed, short and humorless. "Of course you'd say that." Martin Hale raised a hand. "If you have concerns, you're entitled to contest the will," he said evenly. "But until a court decides otherwise, the estate will be administered as written." "And what about us?" Daniel snapped. "We're his children." Martin Hale didn't flinch. "You received what your father intended you to receive." Laura's face flushed. "Which is what, exactly?" Martin glanced at his papers. "Specific assets held in trust, fixed amounts. Substantially less than the primary bequest." The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Accusations, questions, demands. I stayed seated. Michael leaned toward me, his voice low. "What did you do?" he asked. "Nothing," I replied. "I showed up." He scoffed. Don't play innocent. My father, Richard Whittaker, cleared his throat. This is inappropriate, he said to Martin Hale. Surely there are safeguards against this sort of thing. Martin looked at him politely. There are. My mother grabbed my wrist under the table. Her grip was tight. We need to talk, she whispered. Not now, I said, gently removing her hand. The meeting ended abruptly. Daniel and Laura stormed out, already on their phones. Martin Hale asked me to stay behind for a moment. When the room emptied, he looked at me carefully. This won't be simple, he said. I didn't expect it to be, I replied. You should retain independent counsel, he continued. I can provide referrals. I will, I said. He nodded. For what it's worth, Mr. Prescott was very clear. I know, I said. Outside, the air felt sharper. My family cornered me near the parking lot. Michael went first. You embarrassed us, he said flatly. My mother's eyes were wide, darting. Is this true? All of it? Yes, I said. How could you let this happen? Richard demanded. I looked at him. Let what happen? My mother's voice trembled. People will talk. They always have, I replied. Michael laughed incredulously. You think this is some kind of win? You're going to get destroyed. His kids won't let this go. I know, I said. So why did you do it? My mother asked. Why didn't you refuse? The question landed wrong. I didn't ask for it, I said. And I'm not refusing something I earned just because it makes you uncomfortable. Michael shook his head. You're not built for this. You don't know how these people operate. I met his gaze. Neither do you. That shut him up. They left soon after, angry and unsettled. No congratulations, no concern, just distance. Like they were already deciding how far away they wanted to stand from me. That night, my phone rang non-stop. Unknown numbers, voicemails. One message from Laura Prescott, clipped and icy. We need to talk. Privately. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the attorney Martin Hale recommended. Her name was Andrea Collins, a probate litigator with a reputation for being methodical and unflinching. She listened without interruption. Then she said, "They'll try to paint you as a predator." I expected that, I replied. They'll subpoena your employment records, your messages, your finances. Your family will be questioned too. I exhaled slowly. Let them. Andrea paused. You're very calm. I've been underestimated my entire life, I said. This isn't new. She smiled faintly. That may be your advantage. The first lawsuit was filed 3 days later. Daniel and Laura Prescott jointly contested the will, alleging undue influence, isolation, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Local news picked it up by the end of the week. A nurse inherits millions from elderly patient. The comments were predictable. Gold digger. Con artist, fake caregiver. My agency suspended me, pending investigation. My mother called, in tears. You should apologize, she said. Make this go away. Michael sent a text. You ruined everything. I didn't, because something inside me had shifted. For the first time, the pressure wasn't coming from my family. It was coming from people who had never seen me as anything but invisible help. And now they were forced to look. The case would drag on for months. Depositions, hearings, public scrutiny. But as I sat alone in my apartment that night, documents spread across the table, one thought anchored me. Samuel Prescott had seen me clearly, not as a nurse, not as a convenience, as someone who stayed when others didn't. And no amount of money, no courtroom, no family outrage could erase that. They thought this was where I'd fold. They were wrong. This was where I stopped retreating, and the real fight was just beginning. By the time the second headline hit, I had already learned not to read the comments. The first article had framed me as a curiosity. The second framed me as a threat. Caregiver accused of manipulating elderly millionaire, the headline read, printed above a photo of Samuel Prescott's house and a grainy image of me taken outside the courthouse. I looked smaller in it, hunched, mid-step. Easy to judge. Easy to hate. Andrea Collins called me that morning before I even finished my coffee. They're escalating, she said, which means they're nervous. They're not wrong, I replied. They should be. Andrea paused. You're not supposed to say that part out loud. I smiled faintly. I'm not saying it publicly. The formal discovery requests arrived 2 days later. They wanted everything. My employment history, My financial records, text messages, emails, call logs, even my therapy notes from years earlier, which Andrea immediately blocked. Daniel and Laura Prescott weren't just trying to win, they were trying to bury me. What they didn't know was that I had been bury-proof my entire life. Being overlooked teaches you how to document yourself. Being dismissed teaches you how to keep records. Nursing had taught me to chart everything. Dates, times, medications, conversations. I had logs from Samuel's care that went back to the first week. Signed entries, agency reports, emergency call records, emails from his cardiologist, voicemails from Daniel, canceling visits at the last minute. I hadn't kept them for leverage. I had kept them because that was the job. Andrea reviewed my files over a long afternoon in her office, flipping pages without speaking. When she finally looked up, her expression had shifted. "This is solid," she said. "This is better than solid." "They said I isolated him," I replied. Andrea nodded. "You documented their absence." My family, meanwhile, was unraveling in their own quiet way. My mother stopped answering my calls altogether. My father sent a single text that read, "We need distance until this is resolved." Michael was less subtle. He showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning, pounding on the door like he had always done when he wanted control. "Hannah," he called out. "Open up." I waited until he knocked again. "What do you want?" I asked through the door. "You don't get to shut us out," he snapped. "I'm not shutting you out," I replied. "I'm protecting myself." He laughed. "From us? Don't flatter yourself." I opened the door just enough to see his face. He looked angry, but there was something else under it now. Calculation. "You should settle," he said. "Give some of it back. Make this go away." "Why?" I asked. "Because this makes us look bad," he said. I held his gaze. "You didn't look at me at all until this happened." "That's not true," he said too quickly. "When was the last time you asked how I was doing?" I asked. He scoffed. "This isn't about feelings." "It never is with you," I replied. He stepped closer. "You think you're smarter than us now." "No," I said. "I think I always was." That landed. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "You don't belong in that world." I smiled, tired but steady. Neither did Samuel's children. I closed the door. 2 weeks later, I was deposed. Daniel Prescott arrived with a team. His attorney, a man named Gregory Shaw, specialized in aggressive probate litigation. He smiled like he enjoyed the theater of it. They asked me about my childhood, my finances, my relationship history. Gregory leaned forward. "You were struggling financially when you met Mr. Prescott, correct?" "Yes," I said. "And he provided you with stability?" "No," I replied. "I provided him with care." They tried a different angle. "You were aware of the size of his estate?" "No," I said. "He never discussed numbers." "You expected to be rewarded?" "No," I said again. Daniel watched me closely from across the table, his jaw tight. "Did you ever discuss inheritance with him?" Gregory asked. "No." "Did you ever express dissatisfaction with your income?" "No." "Did you ever tell him you felt unappreciated by your family?" I paused. "Yes," I said. Gregory smiled slightly. "And did he express sympathy?" "He expressed understanding," I replied. "And did that understanding include changing his will?" "I don't know," I said. "You'd have to ask him." That ended the smile. Andrea objected often, corrected them when they mischaracterized, let silence do its work when they overreached. After 4 hours, the deposition ended. As we packed up, Daniel finally spoke to me directly. "You planned this," he said quietly. I looked at him. If I had planned it, I would have charged overtime. His eyes flashed with anger. Outside, reporters waited. I walked past them without stopping. Back at home, my agency officially terminated my contract. Not because of wrongdoing, because of optics. Andrea was furious. "We'll address this later," she said. "I'll manage," I replied, and I did. I took per diem shifts, temporary assignments, overnight care for patients no one else wanted. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell the press. I worked. One night, after a 12-hour shift, I found an envelope taped to my door. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "He trusted you. He always did. Don't let them break that." There was no name, but I recognized the handwriting. Margaret Prescott's sister, who had visited once while Samuel was still alive. Quiet, observant. She'd seen everything, too. The first court hearing on the will contest came a month later. Daniel and Laura arrived confident, surrounded, press in tow. I arrived with Andrea. Alone, prepared. The judge, a woman named Patricia Klein, listened without interruption as both sides presented preliminary arguments. Then she spoke. "I see no immediate cause to suspend the will," she said. "Discovery will continue. But until compelling evidence is presented, the estate will proceed as written." Daniel's face hardened. Laura whispered something sharp to Gregory Shaw. Andrea leaned toward me. "That's a strong start," she said. Outside the courtroom, microphones appeared again. "Do you feel guilty?" someone shouted. I stopped. I turned. "I did my job," I said calmly. "That's all." And for the first time, I saw uncertainty ripple through the crowd. They had expected shame. They didn't know what to do with certainty. That night, as I reviewed documents at my kitchen table, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." I stared at the screen. For years, they had decided how far was acceptable. Not anymore. I typed back one sentence. "I didn't start this." And then I set the phone face down. Because the next phase wasn't about defense. It was about exposure. And once the truth started surfacing, it wouldn't stop where anyone wanted it to, including my own family. They had no idea how close they were to being pulled into the light with everyone else, and I wasn't stepping in front of them anymore. Exposure doesn't happen all at once. It starts with pressure, the kind that makes people talk when they think no one is listening. Andrea Collins warned me that the next phase would feel quieter on the surface, but sharper underneath. "They'll start fishing," she said. "Friends, former coworkers, distant relatives, anyone who might say something careless." She was right. Within a week, my former agency received 3 separate inquiries from Daniel Prescott's legal team. They wanted informal statements, off-the-record impressions, anything that could be twisted into concern. What they got instead were time-stamped evaluations and performance reviews that described me as consistent, calm under pressure, and unusually thorough. One supervisor wrote, "Hannah Whitaker maintained professional boundaries, even in emotionally complex situations." Another noted, "She often volunteered for cases involving high-conflict families and end-of-life care." That last one mattered, because it quietly dismantled the narrative they were building. At the same time, my own family began behaving differently. My mother, Evelyn Whitaker, stopped pretending this would blow over. She started asking questions, not to understand, but to assess damage. "Are they really saying you manipulated him?" she asked on the phone one afternoon. "Yes," I replied. "And the money?" she continued. "It's all real?" "Yes." There was a pause. "That's a lot of responsibility." "It's not yours," I said. She inhaled sharply. "You don't need to be so cold." I didn't answer. Michael, meanwhile, tried a different approach. He invited me to lunch. That alone told me something had shifted. We met at a restaurant he liked, expensive enough to feel important, loud enough to prevent real conversation. He ordered confidently. Talked about business, about how stressful expansion was, about how people misunderstood him. Then he leaned back and said, "You know, if this goes the wrong way, it could hurt all of us." I sipped my water. "In what way?" "Reputation," he said. "People talk. You're still a Whitaker." I met his eyes. "I've always been a Whitaker. That never protected me before." He frowned. "You don't need to make this personal." "It was personal long before it was legal," I replied. He leaned in. "You could help us." "With what?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough to tell the truth. "We're exposed now. People are asking how someone like you ended up with that kind of money." I smiled slightly. "Someone like me," he flushed. "You know what I mean." "I do," I said. "And no." His jaw tightened. "You think you're untouchable now." "No," I replied. "I think I'm done being touched." That ended lunch. On the Prescott side, things were unraveling faster. Laura Prescott made a mistake. She contacted one of Samuel's former caregivers directly, attempting to secure a statement about his mental decline. What she didn't realize was that the caregiver, a retired nurse named Helen Morales, had kept her own notes and had been dismissed years earlier after refusing to alter documentation at Daniel's request. Helen called Andrea, not angrily, calmly. "I don't like bullies," she said, "and I don't like liars." Her affidavit arrived 2 days later. It described Daniel Prescott attempting to limit access to medical updates unless caregivers followed his instructions that conflicted with physician orders. Andrea read it twice, then looked up at me. "This changes things." "How?" I asked. "This moves the spotlight," she said, "from you to them." The next hearing was tense. Gregory Shaw tried to frame Helen as bitter, as unreliable, as someone seeking relevance. Judge Patricia Klein wasn't impressed. "Why," the judge asked, "would someone fabricate a statement that exposes them to scrutiny years later?" Gregory didn't have an answer. Daniel shifted in his seat. Laura stared straight ahead. The judge ordered expanded discovery, medical records, care logs, communication between the Prescott siblings and service providers. Outside the courtroom, Daniel confronted me for the first time without witnesses. "You're enjoying this," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm enduring it." "You could stop," he said. "You could walk away with less and still be set for life." I looked at him. "You could have shown up while your father was alive." He said nothing. That night, my mother showed up at my apartment. She looked smaller than I remembered, less certain. "This has gone too far," she said again. "Yes," I replied. "It has." She wrung her hands. "People are asking questions about us, about how we treated you." I waited. She swallowed. Did we miss something?" The question landed late. Years late. "Yes," I said, simply. She nodded, eyes wet. "We didn't mean to." "I know," I replied. "That doesn't change anything." She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. "I already did," I replied. After she left, I sat in the quiet and realized something unsettling. The anger I'd expected to feel wasn't there. In its place was clarity. Daniel Prescott wasn't fighting for justice. He was fighting for control. Laura Prescott wasn't grieving. She was negotiating. And my family wasn't worried about me. They were worried about being seen. The next filing from Andrea would introduce evidence that shifted the case permanently. Not about money, not about inheritance, about neglect, about absence, about who had truly been present in Samuel Prescott's final years. Once that door opened, there would be no closing it. And everyone involved knew it. Which meant the next move wouldn't be subtle. It would be desperate. And desperation, I was learning, makes people careless. That was when the real damage would begin. Desperation has a sound. It's quieter than anger, sharper than fear. It slips into phone calls made too late at night, emails sent too quickly, decisions taken without a second read. Daniel Prescott made that sound first. Andrea Collins forwarded me an email chain early Monday morning. Daniel had contacted a former cardiology resident who'd rotated through Samuel Prescott's care 3 years earlier. The message wasn't overtly threatening. It didn't have to be. He suggested the resident's recollection of Samuel's cognitive state might be reconsidered in light of future professional relationships. The resident forwarded the email to hospital compliance. Compliance forwarded it to the court. Andrea didn't smile when she told me. "This crosses a line." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "they stop pretending this is about concern." The court issued a preservation order that afternoon. No deletion of messages, no alteration of records. Subpoenas expanded again, this time to include Daniel and Laura Prescott's communications with medical staff, caregivers, and legal counsel during the final 2 years of Samuel's life. Laura reacted badly. She took to social media. Not directly, she never used my name, but she posted long, emotional reflections about grief, betrayal, and the danger of outsiders exploiting the elderly. She shared articles about elder abuse. She liked comments that called for justice. The problem wasn't what she said, it was when she said it. Andrea flagged the posts immediately. "Public narrative manipulation during active litigation," she said. "Judges don't like that." Judge Patricia Klein ordered Laura to remove the posts within 24 hours. Screenshots already existed. At the same time, my family fractured quietly. Michael Whitaker called me late one night, his voice low, conspiratorial. You know they're going to start digging into us next, right? Why would they? I asked. He hesitated. They'll want to prove you're influenced, that you've always been this way. This way how? I asked. Ambitious, he said. Resentful. I almost laughed. You think that's evidence? I asked. No, he said, but they'll look for something. I leaned back in my chair. Then they'll find exactly what's there. He didn't like that answer. 2 days later, Andrea confirmed what we'd expected. Daniel and Laura Prescott had filed a motion requesting access to my family's financial records, citing potential collusion. Judge Klein denied it outright. Speculation is not cause, she wrote. That denial landed harder than any ruling so far, because it told the Prescotts something they hadn't fully accepted. This court wasn't buying their story. The first deposition of the expanded discovery phase was Laura Prescott's. She arrived polished, dressed carefully in muted tones. She cried at the right moments, paused before answering questions like she was weighing the truth. Andrea let her talk. Did you visit your father regularly in the final 2 years of his life? Andrea asked. Yes, Laura said. How often? Andrea pressed. Whenever I could, Laura replied. Andrea slid a document across the table. These are visitor logs from the Prescott estate. Would you like to revise your answer? Laura's eyes flicked down. I had commitments, she said. Please answer the question, Andrea said calmly. Laura swallowed. 4 times. In 2 years, Andrea said. Yes, Laura whispered. And during that period, Andrea continued, how often did Hannah Whitaker visit your father? Laura didn't look at me. Daily. Andrea nodded. No further questions. Daniel's deposition was worse. He grew defensive quickly, contradicted himself, dismissed medical staff as overcautious, referred to his father as stubborn and difficult, when records described Samuel as lucid and decisive. The breaking moment came when Andrea asked a simple question. Did your father ever ask you to take a more active role in his care? Daniel hesitated. Yes, he said. And did you? Andrea asked. No, he admitted. Why not? She pressed. Daniel's voice tightened. I had responsibilities. Andrea nodded. Your father did too. Silence followed. Outside the deposition room, Daniel snapped at Laura. I didn't hear what he said, but I saw her flinch. The lawsuit stopped being theoretical after that. My agency reached out again. Not to rehire me, to apologize. Their internal review found no wrongdoing. They offered a letter of recommendation, quiet support. I accepted both. I continued working temporary assignments, careful, professional, invisible when necessary. The money from the estate remained untouched. That was a deliberate choice. Andrea supported it. Let them argue about influence all they want, she said. You're not behaving like someone who needs the money. She was right. The need had burned out of me long ago. My mother tried one last time to intervene. She invited me to dinner, just the 2 of us. I'm worried, she said over dessert. This could change you. I looked at her. It already has. She reached across the table. You don't have to punish everyone. I'm not punishing anyone, I replied. I'm telling the truth, she sighed. That's what scares people. At the next hearing, Andrea introduced evidence that shifted the tone entirely. Caregiver logs, documenting Samuel's repeated requests for Daniel to attend medical consultations. Emails from Laura, pushing for changes to care schedules based on convenience, not medical advice. And finally, a handwritten letter Samuel had dictated to his attorney 6 months before his death, not the will. An explanation. Martin Hale read it into the record. I am of sound mind. I have considered my children carefully. I have also considered who has been present, consistent, and respectful of my autonomy. My decisions are not driven by anger, but by clarity. The courtroom was silent. Judge Klein removed her glasses and set them down. This matter will proceed, she said slowly. But the court notes a pattern emerging. She looked directly at Daniel and Laura. Presence matters. That phrase echoed. Outside, reporters swarmed again. This time, their questions were different. When did you realize your father felt this way? Why weren't you more involved? Daniel said nothing, Laura cried. I walked past them. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and finally let myself feel something close to relief. Not because I was winning, but because the truth was no longer fragile. It had weight now. And weight, once it builds, doesn't shift easily. The Prescotts had one option left: attack my character directly, not legally, personally. I knew it was coming, because people who lose control don't let go quietly. They reach. And when they do, they usually grab the wrong thing. That was when everything would finally turn. The first call came at 6:14 a.m. I didn't answer it. Not because I was afraid, but because I recognized the number. Michael Whitaker. He never called that early unless something had gone wrong. By the time I finished my coffee, there were 3 missed calls and a text. They contacted Dad. That was enough to get my attention. I called him back. "They're asking questions," Michael said the moment I picked up. His voice was tight, clipped, nothing like the confidence he wore so easily in public. "About you. About us." "Who is they?" I asked, though I already knew. "Daniel Prescott's attorneys," he said. "They reached out last night. Said they were doing background verification." I closed my eyes slowly. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," he snapped. "I'm not stupid." "You didn't have to be," I replied. "You just had to be honest." There was a pause. "That's what I'm worried about," he said. The Prescotts had stopped trying to prove Samuel Prescott was weak. Now they were trying to prove I was unworthy. Andrea Collins confirmed it an hour later. "They're shifting strategy," she said. "Character attack. They're digging into your family dynamics, finances, childhood, anything that could suggest motive." "Let them," I replied. "They're hoping your family will contradict each other," Andrea said. "Confusion creates doubt." "My family has been doubting me for years," I said. "They're experienced." She didn't laugh. The next week was a parade of quiet intrusions. A former neighbor from my childhood was contacted. A nurse I'd worked with briefly 5 years ago received a call. Even my nursing school records were requested again, despite already being submitted. Each attempt came with the same implication. She wanted something. She needed money. She was resentful. What they didn't understand was this: resentment had nothing to do with it. If Samuel Prescott had left me nothing, I would still be sitting in that courtroom, because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about being erased, and I was done disappearing. My mother cracked first. She called me in tears late one night. "They asked why you never married," she said. "They asked if you'd ever been unstable." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, disappointment. "What did you say?" I asked. "I said you were difficult," she admitted. "Independent, always questioning things." I closed my eyes. "Did you tell them I was honest?" She didn't answer right away. They didn't ask. That told me everything. Andrea used the family outreach to our advantage. She filed a motion alleging witness intimidation and improper contact with non-party individuals. Judge Patricia Klein scheduled an emergency hearing. Daniel Prescott arrived looking strained. Laura Prescott arrived furious. "This is harassment," Gregory Shaw argued. "We are entitled to investigate." Judge Klein's voice was calm but sharp. "You are not entitled to coerce narrative through intimidation." Daniel's head snapped up. "We didn't coerce anyone." Judge Klein looked directly at him. "Intent is less relevant than impact." She issued a formal warning. No further contact with my family. No indirect inquiries. No informal interviews. Any violation would result in sanctions. Outside the courtroom, Laura lost control. "This is insane," she hissed at me, her voice low and shaking. "You're destroying everything." I met her gaze. "You did that when you stopped showing up." She laughed bitterly. "You think you're some kind of moral authority now?" "No," I said. "I think I'm done being convenient." She stared at me, eyes glossy with something close to panic. "You don't belong in this world." I tilted my head. Neither did Samuel. He built it anyway. She turned and walked away. That night, I found out the Prescotts had hired a private investigator. Andrea wasn't surprised. "They're hoping to uncover something personal they can leak." "Like what?" I asked. She considered. "Anything that suggests dependency, debt, emotional vulnerability." I nodded. "Then they'll be disappointed, because vulnerability wasn't a secret. It just wasn't a weapon." The investigator followed me for 3 days. I knew because I'd spent years noticing things other people missed. Cars idling too long, footsteps out of rhythm, a man pretending to browse the same aisle twice. I didn't confront him. I let him see exactly who I was. Early shifts, late shifts, groceries, pharmacy, home. No bars, no secrets, no dramatic scenes. On the fourth day, he stopped showing up. Andrea received his report a week later. Unremarkable, she read aloud. Consistent, professionally appropriate. No indicators of exploitation or coercion. She smiled faintly. That's devastating for them. My family, however, was unraveling. Michael stopped calling. My father sent a message asking me to clarify things publicly. Say something nice, he wrote. About us. I didn't reply. Because the truth was, I didn't owe them damage control. The Prescotts made their final, most reckless move on a Friday afternoon. They leaked a partial medical report to a tabloid outlet, implying Samuel Prescott had shown early signs of cognitive impairment. What they didn't expect was that the report was outdated and that Andrea already had the full record. By Monday morning, we filed a motion alleging bad faith litigation and intentional misrepresentation. Judge Klein was not amused. This court will not tolerate selective disclosure designed to mislead, she said sharply. Counsel will explain why sanctions should not be imposed. Gregory Shaw looked pale. Daniel looked furious. Laura looked like she might cry. For the first time, I saw fear replace entitlement. Outside the courtroom, a reporter asked me, "Do you feel vindicated?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "I feel finished." That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. Because the fight had changed. They were no longer attacking me. They were trying to save themselves. And that meant the end was near. When people lose control, they don't negotiate. They confess, sometimes with words, sometimes with actions. Either way, the truth comes out. And soon, it would come out so clearly that no amount of money or outrage could push it back in. Not for the Prescotts. And not for the family who had underestimated me all along. Confessions rarely sound like apologies. They sound like justification. The first one came from Laura Prescott, though she didn't know that was what she was doing. She requested mediation, not through her attorney, through Andrea. "I just want this to be over," Laura said during the call. Her voice was brittle, stretched thin. "We're exhausting each other." Andrea didn't commit. She asked what Laura hoped to achieve. "A fair outcome," Laura said quickly. Andrea muted the call and looked at me. Translation? "She wants to bargain," I said, "because she's losing." Andrea unmuted. "Any mediation would need court approval," she said evenly. "And full transparency," Laura agreed too quickly. The mediation session was scheduled for the following week, in a neutral office downtown. No press, no observers. Just attorneys, parties, and a retired probate judge acting as mediator. I arrived early. Daniel and Laura arrived together, but didn't sit near each other. That told me more than anything else. The mediator, Judge Harold Renwick, began with ground rules. Confidentiality, respect, intent to resolve. Then he turned to Laura. "You requested this," he said. "Why?" Laura took a breath. "This has spiraled," she said. "Our father wouldn't have wanted this." I didn't respond. Judge Renwick nodded. "What resolution are you proposing?" Laura glanced at Daniel. He looked away. She swallowed. "We believe the estate should be redistributed, more equitably." Andrea spoke. "Define equitable." Laura hesitated. "We'd like to increase our shares." "And decrease Hannah Whitaker's?" Andrea asked. "Yes," Laura admitted. Judge Renwick looked at me. "Ms. Whitaker?" "I decline," I said. The word landed flat. "Clean," Daniel scoffed. "You haven't even heard the numbers." "I don't need to," I replied. "You're not negotiating in good faith." Judge Renwick raised an eyebrow. "Explain." I looked at Daniel. "If this were about fairness, you would have shown up while he was alive." Silence. Laura's voice cracked. "You weren't family." "No," I said. "I was present." Daniel leaned forward. "You think that entitles you to everything?" "I think his choices entitle him to be respected," I replied. Judge Renwick cleared his throat. "This mediation is optional," he said. "Ms. Whitaker has the right to refuse." Laura's composure fractured. "You don't understand what you're doing," she said to me, her tone sharp now. "You're turning us into villains." I met her gaze. "You did that yourselves." Daniel slammed his hand lightly against the table. "This is extortion," he snapped. Andrea didn't look at him. Extortion involves threats, she said calmly. All Miss Whitaker has done is decline your offer. The mediation ended shortly after. Outside the building, Laura followed me into the hallway. Why are you doing this? She demanded. What do you actually want? I stopped walking. I want this to be over, without pretending your behavior was acceptable, I said. She stared at me, breathing hard. You're punishing us. No, I replied. I'm not rescuing you. That distinction mattered. 2 days later, Daniel made his confession. Not in words, in an email. He sent it to Gregory Shaw. He sent it to Laura. And he accidentally sent it to Andrea Collins. It was short, careless, written in anger. We shouldn't have pushed him to change caregivers. If Dad had just listened, none of this would have happened. Andrea forwarded it to me with one line. This is what desperation looks like. She filed it immediately. At the next hearing, Judge Patricia Klein read the email silently, then looked up. Mr. Prescott, she said, explain this. Daniel's attorney tried to intercept. Too late. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Judge Klein's voice sharpened. You attempted to control your father's care environment. We were concerned, Daniel said weakly. Concern does not authorize interference, the judge replied, and it does not invalidate his decisions. She ordered sanctions, financial penalties, legal fees. She also issued a preliminary ruling affirming the validity of the will pending final judgment. The room shifted. Reporters outside didn't ask me questions this time. They asked Daniel. Laura avoided the cameras. My family watched from a distance. My mother called me that night. I didn't know, she said softly. You didn't ask, I replied. She was quiet. I should have. Yes, I said. You should have. That was the end of that conversation. Andrea called me later. They're breaking apart, she said. Daniel and Laura aren't aligned anymore. I noticed, I replied. When siblings turn on each other, cases resolve quickly, she said. Good, I said. Because what I wanted wasn't revenge. It was finality. The press cycle shifted again. Headlines stopped questioning my integrity. They started examining the Prescott family dynamics. Absentee heirs, power struggles, control. Samuel Prescott's letter was quoted widely. Presence matters. That phrase followed Daniel and Laura everywhere. The final hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. That would be the end, one way or another. But before that, there was one more confrontation waiting. Not in court. At home, my family had requested a meeting. All of them. Together. I agreed. Not because I owed them anything, but because I was done carrying unspoken truths. Sometimes closure doesn't come from winning. It comes from standing still while other people finally see you clearly. And this time, I wasn't going to step aside. I was going to let them sit with what they'd built. The question wasn't whether they were ready. It was whether they could live with the answer. They were about to find out. The meeting was held in my parents' living room. Same couch, same coffee table. Same framed family photos that never included me unless it was a holiday or a graduation. The setting was familiar enough to feel harmless. That was the illusion. My father, Richard Whitaker, sat in his usual chair, hands folded, posture rigid. My mother, Evelyn Whitaker, hovered near the kitchen doorway like she might retreat at any moment. Michael Whitaker paced, unable to stay still. They all looked at me when I walked in, not with warmth. With assessment. You look different, my mother said. I am, I replied. Michael snorted. Money will do that. I took a seat across from them. This isn't about money, Michael laughed sharply. Everything is about money now. I looked at him. Then why didn't it matter when I sent you checks? That shut him up. My father cleared his throat. We asked you here because we need to understand what's happening. You understand enough, I said. You just don't like what it says about you. My mother clasped her hands. You're being unfair. I tilted my head. Tell me when I was treated fairly. Silence. Michael broke it. You've embarrassed us, he said. People are asking questions. They're asking the right ones, I replied. My father's voice hardened. This isn't how family handles things. I met his gaze. This is how adults handle the truth. My mother stepped forward. We raised you. Yes, I said. And then you stopped seeing me. She flinched. Michael pointed at me. You're enjoying this. No, I replied. I'm surviving it. He scoffed. You always play the victim. I stood slowly. That's the problem, I said. You think the person who absorbs everything quietly is choosing it. My father stood too. We're worried about your future. You were never worried before, I said. My mother's voice cracked. We didn't know how to help you. I looked at her. You didn't have to help. You just had to stop dismissing me. That landed. Michael exhaled sharply. So what now? You cut us off? I set boundaries, I said. There's a difference. My father shook his head. You're tearing this family apart. No, I said. I'm refusing to be the glue. They stared at me. The words hung there, heavy. Finally, my mother asked, what do you want from us? I considered it. Nothing, I said. That's the point. Michael laughed bitterly. That's convenient. No, I replied. It's honest. I picked up my coat. My mother reached out. Wait, I paused. You've changed, she said again. Yes, I said. I had to. I walked out. Outside, the air felt lighter. That night, Andrea called. The Prescotts have requested another continuance, she said. Daniel's attorney wants more time. And the judge? I asked. She denied it, Andrea replied. Final hearing stands. I smiled faintly. Because delay had always been their weapon, not mine. The next morning, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a leather-bound journal. Samuel Prescott's handwriting filled every page. He'd kept it during the last year of his life. Observations, frustrations, gratitude. He wrote about me once. Hannah does not rush me. She listens. That has become rare. I closed the book carefully. At the back was a folded letter, addressed to me. If this reaches you, then my children have failed to understand what mattered. That is not your burden. I sat quietly for a long time, not crying, just absorbing. The press requested another interview. I declined. The final hearing approached. Daniel and Laura issued a joint statement expressing respect for the court process. It rang hollow. Behind the scenes, Andrea prepared to introduce the final pieces. Financial records showing Daniel had attempted to access accounts prematurely. Emails proving Laura had pressured estate staff. Patterns, not accidents. On the eve of the hearing, Michael texted me, "We should talk again." I replied with one sentence. I already said everything. I slept that night without dreaming. In the morning, I dressed simply. Neatly. I wasn't going to court to perform. I was going to witness the end of something. The courtroom was full. Judge Patricia Klein entered. Everyone stood. And for the first time since this began, I felt no tension in my chest. Because whatever happened next, I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. And the truth was ready to stand on its own. The courtroom felt different that morning. Not louder. Not quiet, heavier. Judge Patricia Klein took her seat without ceremony. She reviewed her notes once, then looked up at the room like she already knew how this would end and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Andrea Collins stood first. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady. "This case has never been about capacity. It has been about control." She didn't rush. She laid out the timeline slowly. Samuel Prescott's medical evaluations. Independent assessments from 2 physicians, care logs spanning years, visitor records, communications, patterns of absence and interference. Then she pivoted. Today, we address intent. She introduced the financial record. Daniel Prescott's attempt to access estate accounts before probate closed. The flagged transactions. The warnings he ignored. Daniel's attorney, Gregory Shaw, objected. Weakly. Judge Klein overruled him. Laura Prescott stiffened as Andrea displayed the emails. Messages pressuring estate staff. Requests to reconsider documentation. Subtle threats dressed up as concern. Andrea didn't editorialize. She let the facts speak. Finally, she presented Samuel Prescott's journal, not the letter. The journal. "This is not testamentary," Andrea said. "It is contextual." Judge Klein nodded. Pages were read aloud. Samuel writing about autonomy, about resentment toward entitlement, about disappointment that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with absence. Then Andrea said my name. "Hannah Whitaker," she said, "is not a beneficiary because she asked. She is a beneficiary because she stayed." Gregory Shaw stood abruptly. "This is character theater," he snapped. "We are not litigating morality." Judge Klein looked at him evenly. "We are litigating credibility." She turned to Daniel Prescott. "Mr. Prescott," she said, You've alleged undue influence. Explain why your father's documented requests for your involvement were ignored. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Judge Klein waited. Finally, he said, "I didn't think it was serious." A murmur moved through the courtroom. Judge Klein leaned forward slightly. "And yet you thought it serious enough to contest his decisions after his death." Daniel's face flushed. He was confused. "And yet," the judge replied, "his confusion never appeared in medical records until after your involvement decreased." Silence. Laura spoke up suddenly. "He was lonely," she said. "Anyone could have influenced him." Judge Klein turned to her. "Influence is not proven by proximity alone. It is proven by coercion." Laura's eyes darted. She controlled access. "No," the judge said calmly. "You declined it." That ended the arguments. Judge Klein recessed briefly. When she returned, the room stood. She didn't waste time. "The court finds no evidence of undue influence," she said. "The will stands as written." Daniel's shoulders dropped. Laura's lips parted, then pressed together. Judge Klein continued. "Further, the court finds evidence of bad faith litigation, attempted interference with medical care, and improper conduct during discovery." She listed the sanctions: legal fees awarded to the estate, penalties, referrals for professional review. Daniel stared straight ahead. Laura began to cry quietly. Judge Klein concluded, "This court affirms that presence matters, not inheritance, not expectation. Presence." The gavel came down. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded forward. Andrea stepped ahead of me. "No statements today." I kept walking. Daniel didn't speak to anyone. He disappeared into a waiting car. Laura lingered, shaking, then turned away from the cameras and walked alone. My family stood across the street. Michael looked stunned. My mother looked tired. My father didn't meet my eyes. I crossed the street anyway. My mother spoke first. "It's done." "Yes," I said. Michael swallowed. "They lost." "They failed," I replied. "There's a difference." My father cleared his throat. "What happens now?" I considered him carefully. "I go back to my life," I said, without explaining myself. My mother reached out, tentative. "Will you come by?" "Not right now," I said. Michael bristled. "You don't get to act superior." I met his gaze calmly. "I'm not acting." That ended it. I walked to my car, alone. That afternoon, Andrea called. "It's official," she said. "Distribution will proceed." "Thank you," I replied. "You handled this with restraint," she said. "Most people don't." "I wasn't trying to win," I said. "I was trying to finish." She paused. "You did." That evening, I sat in my apartment with Samuel Prescott's journal open on the table. The number no longer felt real. $55 million was abstract. What felt real was the quiet. No buzzing phone, no accusations, no waiting for the next blow. Just space. I transferred a portion of the funds into a trust. Not for me, for elder care programs, for caregiver advocacy, for people who stayed. The rest I left untouched. Because wealth isn't power until you decide what it's for. The news cycle moved on quickly. Another story replaced mine. Daniel Prescott resigned from his company's board within a month. Laura Prescott sold the house. My family didn't call for a while. I didn't chase them. One evening, as I prepared dinner, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It was from a former caregiver who'd worked alongside me years ago. I saw the ruling. "I'm glad someone finally listened," I replied with a single word. "Me too." I went to bed early that night, not because I was tired, but because for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to stay awake guarding anything. The battle was over. What remained was choice, and that was something no one could contest. Not anymore. After the verdict, people expected a transformation, a new wardrobe, a new address, a public statement, something visible enough to confirm their assumptions about what money does to a person. None of that happened. The first change was smaller. I stopped flinching when my phone rang. For weeks, I'd been braced for interruption. A new accusation, another demand, a question I didn't want to answer. When that stopped, my body didn't know what to do with the silence. So I let it learn. I returned to work slowly. Not as an employee, but as a consultant. The agency that had terminated me quietly asked if I would help redesign their caregiver protocols. Better training, clearer documentation, protection against family interference. They offered a generous fee. I accepted. Not out of loyalty, out of alignment. Andrea checked in regularly. Anything new? She'd ask. Just breathing, I'd reply. My family tried again. My father sent a letter. Handwritten. Careful. He wrote about pride, about regret, about misunderstanding. He didn't apologize, he explained. I read it once and placed it in a drawer. My mother left a voicemail. Her voice sounded older, softer. I hope you're okay, she said. We miss you. I believed her. I still didn't call back. Michael sent nothing. That told me what I needed to know. The money settled quietly. No headlines, no ceremony. I set up structured giving, endowments, scholarships for geriatric nursing students, legal funds for caregivers facing retaliation. I didn't put my name on any of it. I wasn't trying to be seen. I was trying to be done. Daniel Prescott resurfaced briefly when his appeal was denied. One article mentioned his name in passing. He didn't contest it further. Laura Prescott moved out of state. No forwarding address. Sometimes I wondered if they thought about Samuel differently now. I decided it didn't matter. One afternoon, while reviewing grant proposals, I noticed a familiar phrase in one application. Presence matters. I closed the file and sat back. The phrase had escaped the courtroom. It was living now. My phone buzzed. A message from Andrea. Judge Klein asked me to tell you she appreciated your conduct. Not many people leave a courtroom with dignity intact. I smiled. That night, I walked through my apartment slowly. It felt smaller than it used to. Not because it had changed, because I had. I didn't need to upgrade. I needed to decide. I made a list, not of purchases, of boundaries, what I would no longer explain, what I would no longer tolerate, who I would no longer rescue. It was shorter than I expected. I slept deeply. The next morning, I drove out of the city. Just for the day. No destination, no plan. I stopped at a cafe off the highway and sat near the window. An older man sat across from me at the shared table. He nodded politely. Long drive? He asked. Long season, I replied. He smiled. Those end eventually. Yes, I said. They do. When I got home, my mother had left another voicemail. I know I can't ask you to come back the way things were, she said. But I hope someday we can talk. I saved the message, not because I was ready, because I no longer needed to decide immediately. That was the real change. Time no longer belonged to other people. It belonged to me. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might do with it. The past had been resolved. The present was quiet. The future was unclaimed. I intended to keep it that way. There was still one chapter left, not about them, about me, and the life that begins when you stop proving you deserve to exist. That life was already unfolding. I just had to step into it. Healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives disguised as routine. I noticed it one morning while organizing paperwork at my kitchen table. No rush, no pressure, just focus. The kind of calm that used to feel dangerous because it meant something bad might be coming next. Nothing came. That was the point. I reduced my workload deliberately. Not because I could afford to, but because I finally understood that exhaustion had never been a badge of honor. It had been a survival tactic. Now survival wasn't required. I started mentoring 2 younger nurses through a local program. One of them, a 24-year-old named Talia Monroe, reminded me of myself before I learned to stay quiet. They don't listen, she said one evening after a long shift. Families, administrators, anyone who thinks care is invisible. They will, I said. Eventually. She looked at me skeptically. How do you know? Because the truth accumulates, I replied. Even when no one's watching. My family remained distant. That distance no longer hurt. It clarified. My mother sent a holiday card. Neutral. Polite. No guilt. No expectations. I placed it on the counter, then recycled it. Not out of anger. Out of closure. Michael resurfaced unexpectedly through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned his business was struggling. Supply issues, cash flow problems, expansion that had outpaced reality. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not concern. Nothing. That absence was the clearest sign of progress. Andrea invited me to lunch one afternoon. You've been very quiet, she said, smiling. Most people in your position disappear into indulgence. I disappeared into alignment, I replied. She laughed. That's a rarer choice. She told me Judge Klein had referenced the case during a judicial ethics panel. Not by name, by principle. Presence matters. I nodded. It always has. That evening, I opened Samuel Prescott's journal again. I'd avoided it for weeks. Near the end, I found a passage I hadn't noticed before. I do not regret my children. I regret not teaching them what attention costs. I closed the book gently. That lesson wasn't mine to carry. I took a walk after dinner. The neighborhood was quiet, familiar, safe. A life I'd built carefully, brick by brick, without spectacle. At home, I drafted a letter, not to my family, to myself. I wrote about the woman I had been when this began, the one who apologized by default, the one who confused silence with peace. I wrote about what she survived and what she no longer needed to. I sealed the letter and placed it in the back of the journal. It didn't need to be read again. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Daniel Prescott had settled a separate civil matter quietly. No details released. I turned the phone off. Some endings don't require witnesses. That afternoon, I finalized the paperwork for a foundation. Small, focused, intentional. Caregiver support, legal protection, education. No press release, no ceremony, just infrastructure. As the sun set, I stood by the window and realized something important. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for permission, not for recognition, not for reconciliation. I had stopped framing my life around reaction. The conflict was over. The consequences had landed. What remained was choice. There was one final step left. Not in court, not with family, with myself. And I was ready for it. The last step wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation left to face, no document to sign, no person whose approval still mattered. The final shift happened quietly, on a morning that looked exactly like every other morning. I woke up without dread. That was how I knew. For most of my adult life, waking up meant bracing. For disappointment, for dismissal, for the subtle reminder that my role was to support, absorb, and step aside. Even after the verdict, even after the money, my body had stayed tense out of habit. Until one morning, it didn't. I made coffee. I stood by the window. I watched the city wake up without feeling like I was late to something I could never catch. That was the moment I stopped measuring my life against anyone else's expectations. I formally resigned from the last consulting contract I didn't enjoy. I kept the work that felt clean and meaningful. I declined invitations that came with strings. I accepted ones that didn't. I sent a final message to my parents. Not long, not emotional. I am well. I'm choosing distance, not punishment. I wish you peace. I didn't wait for a response. Michael never reached out again. I heard through others that he blamed me for his problems. That story made sense to him. It always had. It no longer mattered to me. The foundation launched quietly. The first grants went out. Caregivers who had been threatened, silenced, or pushed out received legal support. Students who couldn't afford certification fees received scholarships. I attended no ceremonies. I read every thank you letter. Not because I needed gratitude, because presence still mattered. One afternoon, I visited Samuel Prescott's grave. No flowers, just a moment. I kept my word, I said softly. I didn't need to explain what that meant. He had trusted me with something heavy. Not money, agency. I carried it carefully. That night, I reread the letter I'd written to myself weeks earlier. I added one final sentence at the bottom. I choose myself without apology. Then I folded it and put it away. If you're listening to this and you recognize the pattern, the quiet dismissal, the way love is conditional on your usefulness, understand this. You are not difficult for wanting respect. You are not selfish for choosing boundaries. You are not cruel for walking away from people who only value you when you're silent. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. Justice doesn't have to destroy. Sometimes the most powerful outcome is a life that no longer revolves around those who tried to shrink you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, excluded, or made to feel invisible by family, like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories about betrayal, karma, and the quiet kind of revenge that restores dignity. Thank you for staying until the end. This wasn't the story of how I became wealthy. It was a story of how I became free, and I intend to stay that way.